This is TWiT.
Today, Amazon announced its 20 finalists for the location of its next headquarters that they're calling HQ2. Joining us to talk about this news is New York Times tech correspondent covering Amazon and the rest of the Pacific Northwest. Welcome to the show, Nick Wingfield.
Thank you for having me.
So you write that Dallas, Denver, Raleigh, and other shoe-ins were on the list. Were there any surprises?
Let's see. I think Columbus, Ohio, Indianapolis, maybe, Newark and New York were both on the list, which was kind of interesting. And I'd say Columbus and Indianapolis were interesting partly because, you know, people don't think of them as tech hubs necessarily. They do have tech activity there, but not in, you know, the kind of top 5, top 7, top 8. And then there were places like Miami, Nashville, I think, that were a little bit surprising. And then there were a bunch of them, overwhelmingly, I think, that were not surprising. I mean, Dallas, LA. It was interesting that they didn't include any West Coast cities except for LA, which seemed like a pretty strong message that they intend to move away from the West Coast in terms of finding the second headquarters.
Yeah, it was kind of what I was wondering about. I feel like, I mean, obviously we're positioned in the Bay Area, so it's easy to get very Bay Area centric. But it's interesting that it didn't end up making the list. But I think, like you say, that's some sort of a signal that says they want to push out of this region into other areas. What about the places? I mean, aside from the Bay Area, you know, exclude that, the places that were passed over, because I mean, there was a huge list of locations that were vying for Amazon to come in and, you know, bring all of that money into the area.
The one that really surprised me, I think, was Phoenix. I mean, Arizona did some goofy stuff. They did this, you know, stunt where they sent a cactus up to Amazon. But Phoenix actually has a pretty vibrant tech scene and relatively low cost of living compared to the Bay Area and Seattle. And I was a little surprised that they passed them over. You know, what else? There were, you know, Vancouver, British Columbia has a pretty happening tech scene as well. Very high cost of living. And then, you know, there were a few others on the list that didn't make it. I think one of the ones that did make it that was surprising was they basically picked 3 regions/cities in the Washington, D.C. area, including D.C. itself, Northern Virginia, suburbs in Maryland, and Washington, D.C. So I don't know if you can read into that, but it sort of feels like they're really putting a lot of chips on the D.C. area.
And so obviously they need an HQ2 because they've sort of gotten too big for Seattle. I mean, gotten bigger. They need more space. Will this HQ2, do we have any idea if it will be as big as the headquarters in Seattle?
Well, it's interesting. They have a little over 40,000 employees in Seattle right now. They've invested billions of dollars in infrastructure up here, buildings and so on. And they've talked about this new campus having as many as 50,000 jobs over time. So, you know, that suggests that it is, as Amazon has said, a co-equal headquarters. That is, at least from a personnel headcount standpoint, it's going to be pretty comparable to what they've got here. Now, can it truly be co-equal if the CEO is based in Seattle and the CFO and, you know, all of the so-called S team, these are the kind of senior leadership members? I think that's an interesting question, but who knows? Maybe some of these people will move to the new location.
My interest is piqued a little bit, just stepping back for a second, around the 2 Washington, D.C. and then the Northern Virginia locations. And you kind of alluded to this a little bit, it sounds like, but what exactly would Amazon stand to gain from positioning around those areas? I mean, would that be a move, you know, from some sort of a political or regulatory standpoint to kind of ease the tensions, as it were, as Amazon becomes such a big, I mean, a massive company at this point? It's hard to, you know, pick a company that's much bigger than Amazon right now. How would that exactly help them?
Yeah, you know, it's so interesting because, I mean, what you just talked about would not be in their stated criteria. The stated criteria that these 3 locations would meet would be, you know, educated tech, you know, educated populace, tech talent, population is over 1 million, and so on. But the unstated wisdom in picking DC, I think, is the reasons that you stated. I had a story last weekend about Jeff Bezos and how he's kind of emerging from his, kind of tech persona into this more public persona, both as the leader of a big tech company, but also the owner of the Washington Post, the owner of a space startup, Blue Origin. And undoubtedly, Amazon is facing more regulatory scrutiny in the years ahead. And I think no one really knows what being in DC might do for them or do for him individually as just as a public figure. But man, 50,000 jobs in the nation's capital or nearby, I think would be a pretty powerful message. At the very least, it would make Amazon familiar in a way that it's just not today. They are familiar through their lobbying operation, but if you have 50,000 employees in the area, every person on Capitol Hill is going to have a friend or a family member or someone that they know that works for the company. And I just think that can't hurt. It doesn't guarantee that they're immune to, some kind of antitrust lawsuit, but it can't hurt.
So you're based in Seattle. What are the day-to-day effects of Amazon being in the city where you live, negative and positive?
It's not, I think, that different than what you might experience in the Bay Area, but just more concentrated. And also in San Francisco, you don't have a tech company as big as Amazon is in Seattle proper. So they've really, it's kind of a monoculture here. We do have other tech companies, but Amazon is the big dog. They have, I think, 20, 25 buildings around downtown. And just as there is in the Bay Area, there is incredible enthusiasm for the change that they brought to the city, and also a lot of resentment of the wealth and the displacement that it's caused for people who can no longer afford to live here. There are, I won't repeat what was said, but there was, a few months back, there was some graffiti painted on a local tunnel that used a profanity and Bezos after it. So you definitely see resentment at a street level in the city, but I would not say that's the overwhelming sentiment. It by and large, the political establishment is on Amazon's side and wants them to stay. And I think if anything, this whole HQ2 thing freaked people out. There was a collective nervous breakdown that people in Seattle had. Oh my God, is the company leaving? Have we been too mean to them or something? And there's been a lot of effort to kind of mend fences with them.
I know you cover Microsoft as well, and they're not in Seattle proper, but in Redmond, just outside of the city. I mean, how are they seen as different, or is it a similar feeling that people of Seattle have for Microsoft?
They've just been here longer, and I think it is different. I mean, first of all, as you say, they're not in the city, so it's this kind of distant thing that's always been out in Redmond. When they started in Redmond, it was kind of like this, bucolic kind of like farm pasture area that turned into kind of a thriving suburb and almost like a city now, a small city. So, the interesting thing is that Microsoft, in what seemed like kind of a counter statement almost to what Amazon did, said that they're doubling down on their Redmond campus. They're basically knocking some buildings down and building them up to be more dense. So they're fine with one headquarters, unlike Amazon, and they're just not growing the way Amazon is. I mean, Amazon is, it's 40 or 50,000 in Seattle, but it's a company of over 500,000 now globally with all of their warehouse workers. So Microsoft just isn't growing like that.
Yeah, it's crazy seeing Amazon just when you think they're so insanely big, it just keeps going. This whole program, this whole kind of pick selection process really feels like a reality TV show. It feels like The Bachelor Amazon edition or something. But we've got 20 remaining locales vying for Amazon's attention. What are they going to have to do going forward to make sure that this happens? Send a cactus to Amazon's headquarters?
Swimsuit competition, perhaps?
Swimsuit competition. What do you think? I mean, at this point, it's got to be really challenging. What do they have to do?
I think that, so it's moving from a stage it's been fairly impersonal. They submitted applications, and I don't think there were many or any meetings with officials from these various cities and states. So now that's starting. There's going to be a lot more direct communication. We got a hold of an email that Amazon sent to officials in Boston today, and will be in my story later. And, it just basically said, like, we're going to be in touch. There isn't a lot of transparency about what will happen, but I think you can expect emissaries from Amazon to visit these places, to be much more specific about with questions about what sites the cities and states and counties are suggesting for Amazon's campus, and what the plans are for tax incentives too. I mean, that's something we haven't talked about, but that's an important part of the consideration. I don't know if Amazon will go back and say, hey, New York, New Jersey offered $7 billion in taxes. Can you give us some more tax incentives? I don't know if it's going to be something like that, but you kind of wonder if some of these areas will sweeten the pot, to kind of make their bids a little more attractive.
Mm-hmm.
Nick Wingfield covers Amazon, Microsoft, and other tech news from the Pacific Northwest for the New York Times. If you want to keep following this story, he is Nick Wingfield on Twitter. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Nick.
You bet.
Take care.